On the island of South Uist in the Outer Hebrides, archaeologists uncovered a Bronze Age settlement known as Cladh Hallan. Beneath the floors of the stone houses, they found human remains estimated to be about 3,000 years old. The bones were unusually intact, with joints still connected, something that is impossible under normal decomposition. Studies revealed that the bodies had been purposely preserved. Most likely they were placed in peat bogs, where the acidic, cold conditions slowed decay. After years, they were retrieved and buried in the houses. When DNA and isotope analyses were carried out, it turned out that one of the bodies was constructed from parts of different individuals. This discovery made Cladh Hallan the only site in Britain where ancient mummies have told a story that archaeologists still cannot fully explain. On the western edge of the British Isles, amid wind-swept plains and cold Atlantic shores, lies the island of South Uist, a part of the Outer Hebrides. Today, it appears quiet and sparsely inhabited, but about 3,000 years ago, in the Bronze Age, an active settlement existed here. It is known to archaeologists as Cladh Hallan. Excavations at this site began in 2001. Scientists expected to find everyday signs of domestic life: stone houses, pottery, tools, hearth remains. But beneath the peat layers lay something far more unusual. The settlement is dated roughly between 1200 and 900 BCE. Its inhabitants were farmers and livestock keepers who worked a narrow strip of fertile land between bogs and the sea. Their dwellings followed a characteristic northwestern European form: oval stone foundations, turf and sod roofs sunken into the ground for protection from relentless winds. Cladh Hallan drew archaeologists' attention not only because of the preservation of its structures, but also because of its unusual layout. Beneath the floors of the houses were small stone compartments which, as was later found, were used for burials. This was contrary to typical Bronze Age traditions, when the dead were buried away from settlements, often in burial mounds or on elevated ground. During one of the excavation seasons, archaeologists discovered under the floor of an ancient house human remains, a man and a woman, buried without grave goods in stone niches. It was a rare find for Bronze Age Britain. At that time, no one suspected that these bodies in particular would change our understanding of death and memory on remote islands. Thus began a story that altered perceptions of burial customs in ancient Britain. Cladh Hallan became the place where archaeology first recorded evidence of artificial mummification in northern Europe. When archaeologists first retrieved the remains from beneath the floor of the ancient dwelling at Cladh Hallan, their condition caused considerable astonishment. The joints of the arms and legs remained in natural connection, and the bones had not disintegrated as is usual after prolonged decay. Even the structure of the spine remained intact. It was strange. In a damp peat climate, organic material should have collapsed after just a few decades. Initial theories suggested the bodies might have been accidentally preserved due to unique soil conditions in the area, but chemical testing quickly ruled that out. So, archaeologists launched a more detailed investigation. Radiocarbon dating revealed something remarkable. The remains weren't buried shortly after death. In fact, hundreds of years had passed between the time these people died and when they were finally laid to rest. That gap was far too long for natural preservation to be the answer. It became clear this wasn't an ordinary burial. All the evidence pointed toward a deliberate ritual, one in which the body was preserved and perhaps even used in ceremonial practices. Yet, there were no signs of violence or disturbance. The remains had been carefully placed beneath the floor of a home, a gesture that spoke of reverence for the dead. Nothing like this had ever been discovered in Britain. Up until then, mummification was believed to be strictly a southern phenomenon, something that occurred in dry, desert climates. But here, on the cold, windswept edge of the Atlantic, the Bronze Age had left behind traces of a very different tradition, thoughtful, deliberate, and previously unknown. This find was the first in Europe to prove that artificial preservation of the dead also took place in northern climates. And it raised urgent new questions. Who were these people? Why were their bodies preserved? And why had Cladh Hallan become a place where the past, quite literally, refused to decay? Further bone analysis was pivotal. Radiocarbon dates taken from different parts of a single skeleton didn't match. It turned out the man and woman discovered at Cladh Hallan were each assembled from the remains of multiple individuals. The head, torso, and limbs came from different people, each of whom had lived several centuries apart. This ruled out any chance of a mistake. The bones had been selected intentionally with careful attention to anatomy. This wasn't a random mix-up, it was a complex ritual. Researchers concluded that these bodies were constructed from ancestral remains to form symbolic figures, possibly intended to represent a lineage. These composite bodies may have served as physical embodiments of family memory, a literal joining of generations. They were placed beneath the homes, almost like guardians of the household, protectors of blood and kin. Cladh Hallan wasn't just a village, it was a place where the living quite literally dwelled above the assembled bones of their ancestors, connecting past and present in the very ground beneath their feet. To understand how these bodies could have been preserved so well, researchers analyzed the bones and surrounding soil. The results showed clear traces of long-term exposure to the acids found in peat. This confirmed the theory. The bodies had been intentionally submerged in a bog where the low oxygen levels and high acidity naturally slowed the decomposition of soft tissue. This preservation method is known from the famous bog bodies found across northern Europe, but at Cladh Hallan, it had been used deliberately and far earlier than any known natural examples. After their time in the bog, the bodies were dried, the joints reinforced, and only then were they placed beneath the home's floor. The process required an understanding of peat's unique properties and just the right amount of time. This wasn't some happy accident. It was a deliberate, practiced tradition. Mummification allowed the body to be preserved in a stable form, becoming part of ritual life in the community. It marked the first time archaeology had ever recorded the intentional use of natural conditions for mummification in ancient Britain. After examining the structure of the bodies, scientists turned to DNA. Despite the damp climate, they managed to extract samples from teeth and dense bone tissue. The results confirmed what had already been suspected. Each part of the body belonged to a different individual, yet all of them were local. They came from the same region, ruling out the idea that these were the remains of outsiders. Genetic markers pointed to close kinship between some of the remains, suggesting ties within the same community or possibly even the same family. Isotope analysis revealed that their diets were virtually identical: meat, dairy, and seafood, foods typical of island life in the Bronze Age. These composite bodies, then, weren't random assortments of bones. They were carefully chosen parts of individuals who belonged to a single cultural group. It points to a ritual that was planned and deeply meaningful, perhaps tied to ancestor worship or a symbolic merging of bloodlines. For archaeologists, this was groundbreaking. It proved that the people of Cladh Hallan deliberately practiced both mummification and the reconstruction of bodies as part of a spiritual tradition, one unlike anything ever seen before in Britain. Modern analytical tools, radiocarbon dating, isotope studies, and DNA sequencing offered more than just anatomical insight. They gave researchers a glimpse into who these people were, how they lived, what they ate, and the environment they called home. Their story revealed that Bronze Age life in northern Britain was far more complex than previously imagined. The people of Cladh Hallan belonged to prehistoric farming communities on the Outer Hebrides, descendants of Britain's first agricultural settlers long before the arrival of Celtic tribes. They developed a distinct island culture, complete with its own beliefs and traditions. These were not isolated hunters at the edge of the world. They were farmers, craftsmen, and seafarers, connected to neighboring islands and the mainland through trade and shared customs. They grew barley, raised livestock, and used bronze tools acquired through networks that stretched across Britain and Ireland. Settlements like Cladh Hallan were stable, multi-generational communities. Homes were built from stone and peat, with clay floors and central hearths. Each new house stood atop the footprint of the old, a tradition that reflected both a respect for the ancestors and a continuous thread of life passed from one generation to the next. Artifacts from Cladh Hallan reveal a Bronze Age society with remarkable sophistication. These people crafted intricate jewelry, pottery, and textiles. They buried their dead, following strict ceremonial practices, and kept careful track of the sun's cycles. Their world had a clear social structure, and a complex spiritual system, one in which the boundaries between the living and the dead were fluid, not fixed. DNA extracted from the Cladh Hallan bones showed these individuals were descended from a blend of populations, early Neolithic farmers and later Bronze Age migrants who had ties to continental Europe. Their genetic makeup tells a story of seaborne migrations that followed the Atlantic coastlines. Even at the far edge of Britain, there were links, exchanges of knowledge and goods, and likely intermarriage between distant communities. The analysis also revealed something extraordinary. The island population remained relatively stable over the centuries. New waves of settlers influenced culture, but they didn't replace the local people. Within their DNA, scientists found signs of adaptation to a harsh environment, metabolic changes and traits linked to vitamin D synthesis in low sunlight conditions. These findings make it clear Cladh Hallan isn't just an archaeological mystery. It's a rare and powerful glimpse into the early history of the North Atlantic peoples. And some of that genetic legacy still lives on in the modern inhabitants of the Hebrides. Today, Cladh Hallan stands as a one-of-a-kind archaeological site, reshaping what we know about Scotland's early past. The discoveries there have shown that even in the cold, windswept Hebrides, ancient communities developed their own ways of remembering and honoring the dead. When archaeologists uncovered the bodies assembled from ancestral remains beneath a house floor, they didn't just find skeletons, they uncovered a deeply human effort to hold on to time. Researchers have since confirmed that mummification at Cladh Hallan wasn't a one-off event or a fluke. Similar remains, bodies preserved and treated in peat, have been found at other locations across the Outer Hebrides. This points to a broader shared tradition that spanned the islands. How to interpret these findings remains a subject of scholarly debate. Some believe the mummies played a role in rituals tied to fertility and the life cycle. Others see them as a symbolic union of a family line, a physical bond between generations in a society where ancestral memory was central to identity. The placement of the remains beneath the homes supports this view. The dead weren't buried far away. They remained literally underfoot, part of the living space and the lives of those above. Today, Cladh Hallan is a protected archaeological site. Research continues, now with cutting-edge tools in DNA analysis, microbiology, and isotopic science. Every year uncovers new clues, yet one truth remains unchanged. On the edge of ancient Britain, people found a way to preserve not only the body, but the memory of who they were. Cladh Hallan reminds us that history doesn't vanish. It simply waits to be unearthed, beneath layers of earth and time.